We've been trying to work through some technical issues and quorum issues, but okay, we'll go ahead and call to order the October 18th, 2022 meeting of the Street and Park Renaming Ad Hoc Committee. Staff, please note that we have the attendance and a quorum, so we'll go ahead and start the meeting. I want to again thank all of you that have agreed to serve on this committee. And while we're in this, although I know that those commissioners and others who are appearing virtually, that your voices come through loud and clear through the speakers we have here, that there is no amplification of the commissioners and the presenters here in the room. So that for all of the participants, or excuse me, the audience who's here in person, we will all endeavor to enunciate as well as we can to make sure that everyone can hear the proceedings. With that, I will go ahead and move to item 2 on the agenda, which is the approval of the minutes of the September 30th, 2022 meeting. At this time, I will entertain a motion to either approve or amend the minutes.
I move to approve the minutes.
Do I have a second? The motion has been made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Is there anyone on hearing virtually, commissioners, who oppose the motion? Hearing none, approval of the minutes passes unanimously. At this point now, we'll move to item 3, which is the call to the public. Based on our discussion last meeting, we will allow members of the public to address the committee for up to 3 minutes. We will limit the total time for public comment to 1 hour. Are there any people in the audience that would like to address the ad hoc committee?
We do have some comment.
We do have comment cards. Okay. Very good. I will take them in the order in which I've been handed them. First up is Melvin L. Redden. If you would come forward. Or would you like to speak? How about right there? Right by Phil?
Mr. Artez can hear now too, so we're good shape. Okay, Andrew?
Was that?
Mr. Artez can hear now.
Oh, very good.
Okay, great.
All good, Kim?
Hi,
Wonderful.
can you
Thanks.
hear me?
Yes, we can. Okay, we're going to,
Fabulous.
Mr. Redden's 3 minutes. If you'd like to have a seat, you can sit over there, by Mr. Kraft, or you can stand, whatever you're most comfortable.
I'll sit down. My name is Melvin Redden. I'm the 4th generation descendant of James Redden. I'm 95 years old and I reside in Prescott. My 3 minutes at the beginning.
Yes.
I know that anything I say during the next 3 minutes will not change your minds or the renaming project, which is well in advance. My main purpose of this statement today is to defend the Redden namesake. James Redden was the first Redden to arrive in the late 1800s when Arizona was still a territory. James was the driving force to obtain land, materials, and labor in 1889 to build the first school building, which was used for 30 years. The Seated School was built in 1889, well before the 1921-25 KKK time frame in question, triggering this renaming project. This was such a big deal for Kyrene and the city of Tempe that a building replica float was entered into the Tempe Centennial Parade. With various terms, the Reddens have served Kyrene School Board from 1889 to 1914. 21 years. That's a total of 7,560 days. A significant contribution for sure. In checking records at the Tempe Museum, I found the KKK membership documents of those who purchased the hooded costumes. No Reddens were listed. 2 Reddens paid for 2-year memberships in an organization that lasted only 4 years, 1921 to 1925. Without the hood, were the 2 Reddens really active members? Today, we really don't know. But we do know that 7,560 board member days is a matter of record. Over the years, Reddens have held various board and teacher positions in the Kyrene School District. From 1889 to 1930, a span of 41 years. This all began with James E. Redden's generosity and leadership to build Kyrene's first school, free to the district. 32 years before the KKK arrived in Arizona. We should learn from history, not try to change it. These changes could cost the Tempe taxpayers several $1 million before it's over with. I would like to offer that James E. Redden Park be used as a new name for Redden Park. This appears to be the original naming intent in the first place, as indicated during our September 30th renaming agenda. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would you like my sources? Are the Tempe Historical Museum, the KKK in Arizona by Sue Wilson Abbey, Kyrene School Records, The Story of Kyrene by Ben Furlong, and The Redden History by my mom, Vetus Redden. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Next speaker, Mario Martinez.
Where should it be?
Same place. You have 3 minutes.
Yes, thank you for this opportunity to speak. My name is Mario Martinez, and I'm speaking as a resident of Tempe.
Could you speak up?
If you could enunciate.
Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, let me start over. My name is Mario Martinez, and I'm speaking as a resident of Tempe. Now, I am in favor of renaming any Tempe street named after Hugh Laird. I'm definitely in favor of renaming it. While I definitely appreciate the input of other Tempe residents to the contrary, I do have a different perspective. Segregation defined my life. I was born into the immigrant Martinez Vergara family of Northern Arizona. Our family was recognized by the Arizona Historical Society. Pardon me, it's hard. To recognize as one of the pioneer Hispanic families of Flagstaff, Arizona. My paternal grandmother was Koya Martinez, and she was featured in the Arizona Historical Society exhibit. Because I was born before the Civil Rights Act of 1964, my neighborhood, South Flagstaff, was racially segregated. I attended the racially segregated schools as well. The African Americans and the Native Americans, we all lived in the same community. And as this death certificate shows for my Theo Jesus from 1933, how we were treated. Okay, this is out of the Arizona Historical it's a record, okay? Let's see, he was severely injured by a falling tree while working as a lumberjack. As officially noted by the death certificate, he was a Mexican with a broken back and a ruptured intestine. Working compensation issues were involved when my grandfather Vicente was visiting and speaking with Jesus in the company hospital. The company officials abruptly told him to leave the room. When my grandfather Vicente returned a short time later, Jesus was dead. The company didn't have to pay Jesus a penny of compensation after that. Back to Laird, okay, the thing that I have about Mr. Laird is his brother was involved with the lawsuit to promote racial discrimination. Of all the forms of discrimination, that was probably the most insidious because it kept us in those jobs. My father, Joseph Martinez, became one of the first Chicanos in the United States to receive a doctorate in physics. But once again, it was before the Civil Rights Act of 1964. He couldn't get a job in the Southwest. I always resented not being able to go to school with my cousins because my father wasn't white. Now, he was represented in the Smithsonian Institute. You know, my father was, but I'll tell you right now, it was not worth it. It wasn't worth it. There's more tragedy in it. Tempe was the first place in Arizona that I lived that was not virtually segregated. You know, I know what it was like. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Martinez. Next speaker card is Patricia Riggs. Ms. Riggs, you have 3 minutes.
Yes, I didn't prepare anything. I wasn't prepared to speak. I'm here representing my father, L. Elton Pat Riggs, who served many years in Tempe City Council and served the people of Tempe. And I've grown up here, and I just want to say that I'm very appreciative that you've accepted the name, at least for consideration. And I know he would be very proud, and I'm very humbled to be here and just represent him. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker card is Victor Jimenez.
My name is Victor Jimenez. I'm a resident of Victory Acres, born and raised there. And I remember the street Laird went in the 70s. But actually, if you research the Laird name, it's from a World War II ace pilot. I don't know how many people know the history of that. And I don't know how many people knew the history of the other meaning of Laird. But I think I would wish to keep it Laird to remember the history of this World War A, since all the other streets in Victory Acres are named after, like George Patton, General MacArthur, they're all named after the war heroes after the war. That's my take on that. And if it has to be changed, I would like to recommend the name Tibshirani, because they're the ones that owned that property, that subdivided it and started Victory Acres. That's about all I have to say. And if park names are gonna be changed also because it offends somebody, I might wanna look at Papago Park, renaming that one also. That one offends a lot of native nations. That's it. That's it for me.
Thank you, Mr. Jimenez. That is all the speaker cards we received. Is there anyone in the audience here in the room who wishes to speak? Okay. Seeing none, is there anyone attending virtually who wishes to speak? Okay. Hearing none. Close the call to the public. And we'll now move to item 4, which is items for review and discussion. We will look at some of the names today that have been recommended. And I also want to have, if possible, a more philosophical discussion about how we want to tackle the issue of renaming these city streets and parks, and have some committee discussion about what approach we want to take after staff gives us a presentation and the following slide. So first, we have item 4A, which is community feedback and proposed names from the online survey forum. And I'll turn it over now to Keely of Arvell Hartzell.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we have had some staff meetings to try to wrap our arms around how to help you get all of this organized. And there seem to be some different approaches that you all could discuss in terms of how you move forward with deciding what new names you want to use. And some of this came out of the conversation last week, and it sort of lends itself to Andrew's comments just now about wanting to have more of a philosophical conversation about how you want to go forward. But we've sort of grouped them into 3 areas, and they are similar names, but with clarification. So you had somebody suggest tonight, for instance, that you take Redden Park and name it James Redden Park so that it's more specific to the family member. The other option would be to use new individual and people's names, and we have a lot of those for you to consider. Another option is to use landmarks or other words that are not names of individuals, and some of those were discussed last week. We have a lot of them. Some of them are things like indigenous words. Some of them are desert plants. So we've got a lot of ideas in that area that have been submitted. And then I think the larger conversation that sort of started last week, but would be helpful for you all to talk about a little bit more to give staff good direction on how you want to proceed, is to talk about this restorative approach as a guiding principle. And that's the concept of a restorative approach is that it would acknowledge and address past societal, racial, and ethnic inequities. And is that something that is important to the committee in terms of deciding what names are going to be chosen? So that's just kind of an overview of where we're going. And I did want to give you a few of the highlights of the names. I tried to summarize them. I did send everybody all the names we've had submitted on the forum so far. I will also let you know that we're getting them from all types of sources. I just heard one today, Tip Shraney, so we'll add that. We've gotten some through council communicator emails where they send them directly to the council. Andrew has gotten some directly. So this is not an exhaustive list yet, but it's at least what we kind of have that's easy to digest right now. And this is just your first time looking at them, so you'll have future meetings to talk about them. But for the clarification type names, these are the suggestions we've gotten. Hudson Park, if you recall, there was some confusion over whether or not it was named after Estimer Hudson or Clay Hudson. So several people in that community have suggested that you just clarify that it's Clay Hudson Park or C Hudson Park or Hudson Manor Park and affiliated with the Hudson Manor neighborhood versus with Estimer Hudson. Similarly, we've had several people suggest that we rename Redden Park James E. Redden Park or James E. and Susan Redden Park, which were the pioneer family members that the person who was here earlier was speaking about. And then another one, which is a little bit different, is someone suggested that Harrelson Park be named after a woman named Juanita Harrelson Park. And there is information in the documents that I sent you about who Juanita Harrelson is. She is not at all affiliated with the other Harrelson, so it's a little different than the other two, which kind of have an affiliation with the existing park. But anyway, I lumped it under clarification because I didn't quite know what else to do with that. Then we have lots of individuals' names who have been suggested. I don't know how much you guys want to talk about these today. I think you can get an idea. I'll just let it sit there for a minute. Maybe you can kind of peruse them. We have a lot of variations of the same names. So you see a lot of Sosas and Lees, and just very, different family members within the same families that are of different generations. These are in your handout. Here's more individual names we've gotten. Lots of different ones. Some of them are, I think, making more of a statement about their ideas on this project. One more of individuals. And again, this doesn't include everything we've had. This is everything that we've gotten through the forum.
So strictly the online forum.
It's strictly the
Okay.
online forum.
Overseeing, okay, gotcha.
So there is a lot of duplication in the online forum, so I tried to represent that here so that we're not duplicating, unless people were saying a specific SOSA family member versus SOSA family, you know, those kind, I do have those in there. Then we go to, I guess I'll call them non-individuals for lack of a better way to describe it. So you have lots of different ideas here, names of parks based on things that are relevant to the community. Names of the Tempe sister cities, I thought that was an interesting one. There's explanations for a lot of these in those documents that I sent you. And then not quite as many of these. But there's one, like, some of them are fun, streety, mixed street face street. So there's, anyway, so that's what we have for what's been suggested so far. And I guess I would just stop there and let you have your conversation about how you want to proceed with deciding what names you want to consider to help us kind of narrow down what you want to look at.
Thank you, Colleen.
I just had a question. If staff has had an opportunity to talk to Raylan and reach out to,
For Southern Tribes, yes, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Kuby, we have talked to Raylan. We're in the process of trying to get that scheduled, and we will talk about it under the public outreach plan.
Does any member of the commission, the committee want to start the conversation about what's been received so far? Approaches, anything about what you've been able to review in your packet prior to today's meeting? If you're virtual, go ahead and you can raise your hand with the button, or you can just turn on your mic and get our attention. Okay. That's JC. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Just nothing concrete or anything, but I really like the idea of kind of using the same names, but kind of redefining the people that the streets or parks are named after, and making sure that that redefinition of names goes along with the kind of the direction we want to go, and kind of unaffiliate the people that have been affiliated with it. I like that, just mainly from a cost benefit, just not having to redo a whole lot of signs. So that's my 2 cents, but I'm open for any other suggestions too.
Go ahead, Mr. Kessler.
I'm inclined to, as part of renaming, not to name it after any individual. We went years upon years before we uncovered bad history about some of the names that we're currently dealing with. If we name it after John Doe, an individual, who knows whether 20 years from now, somebody's going to find information that John Doe was not a good person, or he spoke badly about people. And now you're back into another renaming exercise. I think if we were to do renames for things rather than individuals, I think we could come up with excellent names to be used. And I think it would eliminate any future discussion, confusion about the name that was picked.
Thank you, Mr. Kessler. Not sure who's.
I think they were up
We
there.
have a virtual hand up, Lisa Groom. Is Lisa on?
Good evening. I'm
Okay.
sorry.
Lisa, just before you start, Lisa, I'm sorry. I just want to note, you're not a member of the committee, but since we allowed a call to the audience earlier, I think that you're fine. Go ahead.
I'm actually raising my hand for Commissioner Dartez because she can't unmute.
Oops, okay. Okay, go ahead.
I'm not sure if there's anything on your end. Kim, are you able to speak now? I think there's a problem. She says she can't unmute, so
Hear me now?
yes.
I believe it unmuted. It told me how to unmute. I'm sorry. I apologize about that.
No worries.
And
Thank you,
again, I
Lisa.
apologize that I wasn't able to make it in person. I had some car problems. But I did want to say that I believe the harm that has been done. By the way, I'm the commissioner for the African Affairs Commission for the state of Arizona. I was appointed by Governor Ducey, and in that role, I'm speaking for African Americans in our city. And the fact that Tempe was a sundown town, so the history of Blacks in Tempe is not been able to be expressed or developed because we weren't even allowed to be in the city. I think that it's only fair that some African Americans names are given to some of these parks and streets. I believe we have been harmed in such a way through the years that it needs to be remedied. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So, just a couple of thoughts. The first of which, I do think it's a safe approach, naming it after items or figures or landmarks, just so not to incur, the risk of someone else's name being besmirched and having to revisit this. However, I do see the value in undoing what some would, view as a scar on the city and replacing it with, someone that would have been the target of their anger or animosity. Particularly, if we're looking at historical figures who've already established their reputation. So not a suggestion, but a Martin Luther King Jr., where no one would, truly have, much of a objection to naming one of our streets after him. There are figures in society who are, their reputation have been established that we may be able to honor, and not only as a opportunity to honor the individual, but also as a reflection that Tempe embraces the diverse culture of America.
Thank you. Shereen and then Lauren.
So I have real mixed feelings about that, about the sort of where we are right now in this discussion. On the one hand, I actually agree with Mel. I have concerns about naming after individuals who, where in 20 years we might find an issue, but I wonder if there's a way, something like San Pablo, which was the original community that was here, would address some of that, right? It would recognize that the Hispanic population helped build Tempe before they got moved out as ASU built. So I have concerns about the names as well, unless we knew really we had that vetting. But there are other things we can do, I think, that recognizes our diversity, which is really what we want to do, is recognize, how did Tempe arrive? How did it get built? Who were the people that were involved, the communities that were there? So I lean in that direction. I do also think it's worth us looking at some of these names, and if there are people who continued service who have the same name, but it's not those people, like the clarification that was mentioned, I think it's worth us at least taking a look at that, rather than changing a name for another reason. But if that, so it would be basically, I think it's worth us doing a little bit of a deeper dive to make sure, to see whether or not that would work. So I guess those are my.
You don't want to change names of people that are already there, but you're opposed to adding names of people. I don't understand that at all.
I don't think we're having a debate right now. I think we're all just providing our perspective, and then we'll continue to, because there's a lot of other people here who are still going to want to speak. I'm just giving my perspective right now at this point. So I think we should just hear from everybody who wants to speak about their perspective.
Okay. Next, I recognize.
I don't think
Well, yours is just kind of.
Kim, just real quick.
Okay, I'll stop.
You're okay. I want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to weigh in. And then once that occurs, then we can go back and have additional comments from commissioners, okay?
Yes.
Thank you.
I think we all knew when we took this assignment, it wasn't necessarily going to be easy and it could be uncomfortable at times. I know that I think in terms of it being a restorative approach, and it would be easy just to switch a name to a different family member. It'd be easy to, call it Palo Verde Lane. But that there is a restorative aspect of this. And, I want to think in particular about someone that's mentioned here. It's Adolfo Romo and Joaquina Jones. It's important to mention them both because in those days, even though Joaquina Jones was involved in the lawsuit, I'm going to mention, she wasn't, because she was a woman, her name wasn't on the lawsuit. So it's Adolfo Romo, Joaquina Jones, 4 children. They weren't allowed to attend the school. They're racially segregated school. They launched a lawsuit against Hugh Laird and the school board. He was the chairman of the board at that time. That was a tremendously courageous thing to do in Tempe. When you're going up against the leadership and city council, you're going up against the societal elite. So it was the first challenge to Plessy versus Ferguson, released with desegregation related to Hispanic integration. And they won the suit. He won the lawsuit, and the next big win for desegregation was Brown versus Board of Education. So it was a really important lawsuit, yet, the students who are at that school, like Laird School, they see Laird, they don't see Romo Jones. So if you want to talk about history being erased, let's talk about Romo and his family and what they accomplished and what they contributed to with that lawsuit. So, I think there's a strong case. Maybe it's a mixture of polyglot we could consider with place name, especially as relates to Indigenous community, because they may not feel that comfortable with a specific name being assigned that's not part of the culture. But I think when we think of Laird Street in particular, you can't not think of Romo Jones because there's such a strong connection, and it's a matter of righting a wrong that was done and bringing to light a history that was erased. This is a tremendously courageous couple that took on this action. They caused tremendous social change in Tempe. And it's interesting to note that when that decision was made, it was made, yes, your kids can go to the school that has certified teachers, that is the white school, but nobody else, right? But what happened is on the day of enrollment or the day when the school started, from my reading, Jared, I may be wrong, a lot of people showed up, like hundreds of people, and said, we want the same thing. And that was eventually accommodated over the next year or so. And so that was a tremendous moment in our history that has been ignored and been erased. So to me, to think about a wholesale approach of like, no, let's use place name, let's use landscape names, or let's just change the name a little bit and tweak it, ignores the restorative aspect to this, and ignores like one of the more powerful reasons why we need to do this in our city.
Phil and then Justin. Thank you. I think that as a committee, what we should probably be focusing on is a way to whittle down the lists that we have by making, bushels to put categories in, like the clarification of names, like landmark names, like maybe avoiding 21st century names just because history has yet to be written. And the example that Mel said, it's like, who knows in 20 years what we're going to find out or what will come to the surface. Even historically, Thomas Jefferson, we used to think he was an okay guy, but he was a slave owner and all the other bits of history about Thomas Jefferson. So perhaps we should really narrow down the name lists to a very select few, just because it's too unclear as to who they were. I think that, if we can get the list cut down a bit so we can address it for what it is, rather than who's this guy, who's this guy, who's this guy, it's going to take us till this time next year to explain who the people were. I didn't know about the lawsuit. I knew nothing about that. But, it took, let's say it took 5 minutes for you to say that. If everybody has them, we're going to be here a long time. So I want to find a way as a committee that we can find a way to qualify certain of the suggestions and perhaps eliminate some of the suggestions just because it won't work. My thoughts. Sorry.
Appreciate it. Justin.
I just have a lot of trepidation about the clarification aspect of and going down that road. And this is, like I said, we're all just commissioners here giving our opinions and stuff. But like the truth is, and if you change it to a clarification, people are still going to call it Clay Hudson Park. They're still going to call it Hudson Park. And that name and that meaning and the real meaning will still remain there at that park. And that's just the truth. No one's going to call it the C Hudson Park. Maybe in city brochures and this and that, but everyone that lives around Hudson Park, or everyone's going to Hudson Park, or everyone's going to, you know, Hudson Manor Park, it's still going to be Hudson Park, which doesn't change the reason why we're even having this conversation today. Because that original name is still there. The damage that has been done with that name has already been there. And I just want to just say that matter of factly, put it out in the open, say that is what's going to happen. And that's how people react. And Redden Park will always be Redden Park, and Harrelson Park will always be Harrelson Park, and Hudson Park will always be Hudson Park. It'll always be referred to that.
Disagree.
Okay.
Yeah, for all the online commissioners, I'll go ahead and we'll recognize you once we get everybody have an opportunity to speak, okay?
And
Go ahead, Mr.
And I get it's simplistic and you can save some money and you can make some neighbors there in those parks that have pride for their neighborhood or park happy. But like the name that has done the damage is still on those signs and still being talked about. And if we're talking about anything restorative here today and what's already been given by council as a direction, like it's the names that are the problem. That's the direction we should be in.
Thank you.
I'm definitely mindful of how the street names in particular will affect the people who are on those streets. So if we were going to just clarify, in terms of priority, I would prioritize keeping the name of streets if we had to do that. I do tend to lean more toward a restorative approach. And initially, I just wanted to share this. Initially, as I was reading through the suggestions, I was thinking, well, they have to have made an impact on Tempe. Like, I think that should be a prerequisite. But then on the other hand, the people who, you know, the groups of people who were targeted by the KKK didn't have the same opportunities necessarily to sit on council or school boards or things like that. So I just wanted to share that because I just was thinking about that as we were talking.
Yeah, so I really like the restorative approach, and I think as a guiding principle, and I think it can be done with names or other words, not after like plants, but and like Hannah said, people that the people that were discriminated against, they didn't have the opportunities to sort of make a name for themselves, right? So there's so many people that are going to be neglected. But I think it's important to have a restorative approach. And I know this is probably getting into the weeds a little bit, but when it is done, I think from a visual perspective, there should be, and wherever literature is, an explanation of what this name means, like why this change or what the new name means, and some artwork around it that explains like what's happening. Yeah.
Yes.
Personally, I just believe that we should not be afraid to be bold in this situation. I don't know how certain family members feel to have their family name, their last name to find out this new information that they might not have known. I can only imagine how it feels to have that last name revoked, to mean something here in Tempe. However, as Mr. McPherson said, when it comes to the Native Americans, African Americans, and Indigenous American communities, historically in America, our struggles, our issues have always been brushed under the rug. Our issues have always been looked at as if they're not important. And I believe if we take the easy road here, this is just showing exactly that what we the KKK is not going after, maybe they were going after white people, but that's predominantly not who they're going after. Who they're going after, individuals that look like me, darker toned than me. But I truly do think to Mr. Jaime. Jaime was your name, sir?
Pete?
No, gentleman, like that?
Mr. Redden.
No, sorry. Well, I'm Mr. Redden. Yes, Mr. Jimenez. I do think that there are opportunities where we can honor tradition, specifically in the Victoria neighborhood, where we can find if this last name Blair is not the ace pilot, if it is the guy that's part of the KKK, I do believe that we can honor that tradition of naming Blair Street after someone in the military of color who was impactful, whether it's Arizona or America. But I do believe that we should not take the easy road out. I do think we should challenge ourselves and not be afraid of the repercussions that may come from our decisions here. Because it's important that we represent people who have, specifically from the KKK, been crucified. America's probably been around.
Thank you. Other question or other feedback from commissioners present in the room?
So just for clarification.
Yes.
The opportunity to suggest names hasn't concluded, correct? Not only to the committee, but to the public as well?
That's correct.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. I'll talk about it more during the public outreach discussion.
Raylene?
Hi, I just wanted to make a brief comment about the names that we were given. I do notice that there are some Native American names that have been suggested. And I just want to point out that the tribes will not consider using the word Hohokam. Hohokam is an archaeological term that archaeologists came up with to identify the prehistoric people. And it is not a Native American word. It's a derivative of Huhugam, which in the Otham language means or translates to those who have passed on. So technically the word is in reference to people who are no longer living. And we do have, I know the First Tribes have expressed concerns of the use of Hohokam and Hugam because of the reference to the ancestors. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other commissioners appearing virtually who would like to speak to this?
Ms. Dartez is waiting for you.
Yeah. Okay, hearing none, go ahead, Kim.
I apologize for speaking out of turn. It's such an emotionally charged topic and conversation. And as someone so eloquently spoke earlier about the fact we've not had a chance to really make the historical imprint in Tempe, or if things have happened, it was under the radar. So the names that we have brought forth are people, from within probably, the last 50, 60 years. But I mean, there's so many names and of streets through Tempe that I think it would be an honor to at least change a couple of the names or a couple of the parks to actual people to honor them. And as someone said, put it in the materials, in the marketing. And I know someone said that, even if you change the name, people are still going to call it by the old park. I disagree. And especially if people understand why the name was changed, I think people will respect that and honor that. And thank you for allowing me to speak.
Yeah, it was like, to clarify, Lynn, this Lauren, to clarify, I don't think, well, Justin, you should speak for yourself.
Yeah, I'll speak for myself. I was just saying if we did the clarification name idea, so we changed like Hudson Park to Clay Hudson Park, people would still call it Hudson Park. If we change it to Tempe Splash Pad Park, people would then call it Tempe Splash Pad Park. I was just saying if we just kept it to similar names, the old name would still stay intact. That was the point that I was making, not saying if we changed something that people wouldn't be the same name.
Thank you for that clarification.
And just, I can just add, one of the points I was also referring to is that we also have place names like the San Pablo, which is an original Hispanic community that helped basically build Tempe. So in thinking of alternatives to honor those who came before, that's where I was coming was, you know, Tempe wouldn't have been here without the people who lived in that community.
Thank you. Anyone else? Comments? Thoughts on the commission?
I don't mean to throw like a monkey wrench or make it more complicated, but I started thinking about how, you know, a lot of time was spent going through these character areas and defining the character areas. And I don't know if that's another lens to look at it through. Just putting that out there. I don't know if everyone knows what I'm talking about, but the character area study. So it seems like that might apply a little bit.
Is there any possible way we can get into contact with these individuals who suggest the names to get more background information? That thing.
If they left their names and contact information, a number of those were anonymous submissions, so they wouldn't be for that, but.
And I don't, if you see I brought a few hard copies. There is a lot of information about some of them provided. I will pass around a couple of these if people want to look at them. You want to just pass with those down? And then others, you know, you don't get any explanation as to why. So I'll ask our folks who run the survey, but I don't think we asked for anything. There might be emails. I'll see what we can get.
I don't know who said it about us looking 20 years and finding something, but that is very, Mel, guess who said that? So that is very possible that can be a thing. So like, even if we were gonna choose people, I think before we said yes, I think some background information, a deep dive and dive into who they were and how they impacted Tempe or Arizona, is equally important. And as Miss Lerner, is that how you say your last name?
Yeah.
Miss Lerner, said, we should honor those who came before us. Like, to what Ray Lynn said about certain tribal names, if we're gonna name anything after native tribes, I think we should go directly to the native tribes to get their input rather than us who are not natives, unless you guys are native, decide what and how we honor native individuals. So I think it's the same thing with African Americans and Latino Americans. Like, if we're gonna do these types of things, it has to honor who they are as individuals and the restorative aspect of what we're trying to do here with abolishing KKK here in Tempe.
Thank you. As you're looking at, go ahead, Lauren.
Ask a question of Jared or the history staff. First black settlers in Tempe, they went by the name of Green, the Green family.
Right.
I don't see, could I add that name into the record? Possibly. Green Street.
Do you mean it to be considered generally for all the different facilities, or is there a facility in particular?
No, just as a possible name.
Okay. All right, we will log that in. Thank you.
Other thing I wanted to ask about, I assume, you know, Laird Street is bifurcated, West Laird and East Laird. Does it have to be the same name? Could it be two separate names? West Laird be one name and East Laird be another?
Theoretically, yes. Theoretically, often. I want to say something real quick, because I think Phil made a good point, and I was thinking about the task at hand. There's a lot of submissions, and I want to be mindful of everyone's time. I was thinking as we were sitting talking about this, as just to offer for consideration, a couple of what I would consider neutral filters that might help reduce the overall number. One would be, do you or do you not want to consider the names of anyone who's alive? Because if that were to be taken off the list, you take out quite a few of the submissions. Second would be, do you or do you not want to consider the names of individuals who do not have a direct relation to something concerning the city of Tempe? Those are two potential, there may be others. Those two don't speak to really any, whether or not it's a clarification, whether or not it speaks to the individual piece and to potentially, depending upon the species of plant, I mean, some of those may not be indigenous species and might be applicable there to say they're not native species to the area that Tempe occupies and therefore should not be considered. Are those filters that have any resonance with members of the commission?
Well, the first filter, yes, so not naming after any living individuals, but I would not support excluding anyone not from the area. Again, for two reasons. One, some ethnic groups weren't allowed to make a contribution. And then secondly, maybe a little bit selfish, the recommendation that I have that maybe we can enter into the record is Whitney M. Young Jr., who was the president of the National Urban League from 1961 to 1971, served as a counselor to multiple presidents, including Richard Nixon and Lyndon B. Johnson, won the Congressional Medal of Honor. And given his impact, he was known as a consensus builder. Supported the civil rights movement, but was one that was widely accepted and respected in all communities, from the Black and brown communities that were fighting, who were being oppressed, as well as politicians and corporate execs who respected his opinion and an ability to kind of to serve as a power broker, as he's known. And he's also an Army veteran, so he is not from Arizona, but he's a national figure who's heralded. Reputation has been solidified, and much information we can easily find about him. So just reiterate the second point, I would not want to exclude any National Bureau figures.
I agree. If I may.
Well, I'd like to say I did submit Michelle Brooks Foster's name, and she did a lot of things for the city of Tempe. She recently passed away in June of this year. But Michelle was very active on several Tempe school boards. She was instrumental in bringing Juneteenth to the city of Tempe. She worked tirelessly with both the police board and the fire department. She's done a lot of things to establish diversity here in the city of Tempe, and I think it would be well deserved.
Thank you, Kim. Yeah, the filters I suggested would not exclude Michelle Brooks Totchers because she's both deceased and she has connection to Tempe. But go ahead. Commissioner Kraft had his hand up, so I want to give him a chance to speak. Go ahead.
But the idea, I agree with what Mr. McPherson was saying, that we shouldn't have a qualification that it's strictly having something to do with Tempe. I believe that national impact that benefits people from Tempe, that gives us a broader, for instance, Mr. Jimenez, his neighborhood is named after World War II figures. So one would assume that if you're going to change a name in there, it's probably going to still have to have something to do with World War II. Not necessarily direct to Tempe, but I think it's important that we have, some qualifications for national impact that benefits the residents of Tempe at the same time.
Thank you.
Yes. So I guess I take a different point of view. I think considering that there are so many names of folks that were really influential in Tempe, that I would propose that it be someone who has some relationship with Tempe, or you mentioned San Pablo. I'm also thinking of Buffalo Soldiers. Buffalo Soldiers played a prominent role in Tempe. I understand from the African American experience reading that book. So
that's a possibility if we want to look at either a military suggestion or perhaps, a suggestion from a soldier, a fallen soldier from La Victoria might be really appropriate. But I lean towards wanting to honor our own history, since what we're doing here is reflecting on our history and asking these different questions. So I'd like to reflect on Tempe and sort of keep it there.
Other comments?
I think we're thinking about it like that. I think if we're gonna name streets and parks after individuals, I think a majority should come from Tempe or at least Arizona, but at the same time, I wouldn't see it maybe with like one or two sprinkle in, a little bit more that have a national impact on us.
I appreciate the input. Like I said, it was just a suggestion to help get our arms around the volume of names. But I think no one raised an objection to the idea of not considering anyone who's alive, at least, that could help reduce some of the number of names, that we would keep it to people who have already passed away, and that we can reevaluate the names, both those that might be local and those that might be regional or national as well, that those could still go forward.
Mr. Chairman, I
Yes.
just had an idea. How about if maybe you could say anyone outside of Tempe with a name? Because you could just narrow it just to names of people outside Tempe. So like McStreety, like that's outside of Tempe. So you could take that one off possibly, or I'm just thinking there might be a way to narrow down the non-individuals to not be from outside of Tempe at least, so that you have that list come down a little bit if there's stuff that doesn't really relate directly to Tempe. Like Daisy Park, or, I mean, there's several on there, not to say I'm not, to any members of the public, I'm not lobbying against your names, I'm just trying to give examples.
Well, I took that to be a farcical sort of admission anyway. So if there are some that appear to be sort of just kind of patently farcical, that we could probably say, we won't consider those. Like cancel Cultural Boulevard.
Yeah, the British ship ultimately named
Oh, yeah.
foolishly like that. If they had a public
Yes.
contest, Shippy McShip or something.
It won in some contest.
Yeah.
Right. But
my question is, can we as a committee establish perhaps a subcommittee of 3 or 4 members to just kind of go through and call the list from the sublime to the ridiculous? Use it so that we can actually get the work done that really needs to be done.
I think if we're going to do that, we probably need to come up with a documented list of the criteria that will be acceptable to us. So you have a yardstick to measure a name against and say, this fits for our accepted criteria. This doesn't fit, let's set it aside.
The town I come from back east, I was on a commission there, and we did monuments. People would rush to get a monument done when somebody died. And we had to set up standards by which people could decide who actually should have a monument and who's just fine in a cemetery with a name on a stone, and so we had to come up with qualifications for what actually merits memorialization. It's kind of like what we want to try to do here. You have to put it in writing first and then get it out there to the town.
So I don't support the idea of going to a subcommittee. I think we should provide direction and staff can take that direction, because then, we're sort of cut out of the process and a few people make the choices. But I would like to explore to see whether we have consensus on the restorative sort of theme, and whether we should not consider, it will reduce a lot of the non-individual names, not consider names related to plants, or related to, if we do have consensus, that, that's sort of the easier way out, but it's not sort of why we're here. This is a sort of pivotal moment. I know the council gave this very serious consideration, had thorough public engagement discussion. We had, so many speakers that night. And strongest sense from Tempe residents was that this should have a restorative sense.
So I don't know if we have consensus on that. I'd like to explore with the fellow commissioners to see whether we do, because that will help us to reduce the numbers, the names considerably.
So I understand the request. You're saying that you would like for the commission to apply a filter, if you will, that you'd only consider names that are restorative in nature, which would be limited to names of individuals? Or could it,
Not necessarily in San Pedro Park.
is that San Pablo? San Pablo,
Park,
okay.
that has historical meaning. But that is a restorative name, I believe.
Fair enough.
May I say something?
Sure.
I'm
Yes.
sorry to be a little bit late breaking in, but I would like to support what Kim Dartez said about Michelle Tatris, because she has brought Tempe a long ways in terms of Juneteenth and Black History Month and prayer breakfast. And so I would think it very, very honorable to the work she has done if the commission, the council would consider her name.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, she's on the list.
Yeah, she's on the list and she's not, I don't think anyone's here is saying that she shouldn't continue to be considered. Okay, so
Very good. Thank you.
I was just thinking, you're right, San Pablo is a location, historic location. It's not the name of a person. It's the name of an area that is as Shireen described. I don't know how people feel about, I mean, for instance, if we were to apply that standard, Lauren, I don't necessarily think that freedom or liberty or justice would necessarily get eliminated either, right? Because they get to the principles that have restored, are meant to be restorative. So I'm trying to, so what you're saying is
Filter to take.
Right. that the filter would be, if we applied something like that, it would be, you're asking the question of the commission, if the restorative principle is the practice, at least a primary guiding principle of this committee, that would tend to eliminate names of plants, et cetera,
Right.
Mr. Chairman.
or Sunset Butte. or
Yeah,
something
if
like
you did
that.
something like that, staff could just put on a list the ones we think are iffy and then bring it back to you to decide if you want it to be included or not included.
All right. Well, I'll open the question then for input then.
Is Mushroom Street psychedelic Mushroom Street or?
I think that actually is.
I thought it was referenced
Yeah.
like Super Mario Brothers, maybe. I'm not sure. Yes, go ahead, Julie.
And some of the names have, like, it says Arriaga Park, like, what is that? But it doesn't give an explanation.
Yeah,
What is that?
I think
The name.
it-
Or this?
Yeah, Tommy Arriaga was a Tempe firefighter who died in his early 30s of cancer.
He's
I
on
don't see
the,
it online.
on the presentation, I actually have it written out more.
Yeah,
Oh, okay, here it is. Okay. But if there's any, I guess my point is that there's no explanation. How far are we gonna dig into it to try to figure it out? I don't know. There's just a thought.
Well, I mean, I think what I can hear from everybody is that we do want to go in the restorative area. So I think if we could narrow down and, even if it's just removing mesquite and, some of those others that, I understand people were trying to find something that was non-controversial, but that's not what we're doing here, right? We're looking for things that actually respect the past and respect people who lived here who were not given that respect in the past and not recognized. So I think the restorative, at least what I'm hearing, is most people, and I'm not speaking for everybody, but I think that would be certainly something we should have as our basis for, as we move forward, saying that, is this going to be something that will recognize contributions, recognize where we came from, but we haven't done.
Recognize our history.
It's part of our history that we haven't done. We have some, we have a lot, but we don't have, there are whole communities that we don't recognize. So I support using that as a first way to cut, would be to say, let's make sure that they fit the restorative piece.
Yes, Bill.
I'd like to see restorative as part of our criteria.
Yeah.
But I don't know that it should be the first thing. I think that when we get to a list, to then go through it and say, is it restorative? Is it restorative? makes a little bit more sense, because otherwise we're cutting out a whole swath of names because they're not restorative.
I have a thought about that, because I was thinking the same thing. Maybe one suggestion could be is that we take all the current suggestions, we create sort of a red, like a red, green, yellow sort of situation where if there's someone who's alive, we've already, I think, all agreed that we won't consider those names. We won't take them off the list. We'll just put them in an area that says the committee has already agreed not to consider these names. Then you have the criteria that's been suggested, which is names that would tend to be restorative in nature. And we create a list out of all existing submissions of those that at least staff, if we ask them to do so, would say, we believe these are those. And then it would be every other name that is neither people who are alive or deemed restorative. That list would also be published to all of us. Then at the next meeting, you'd have the opportunity to look at that list and say, I believe that there are in fact restorative names there that we can then move over into the consider list. That way, nothing is removed, everything is still under consideration, but you have some basis. It's not just shooting in the dark. You have a sort that's been made that can then be, a sort that can then be moved around by the will of the overall body.
And I think it should be restorative. I don't understand why he's saying that we should entertain any names that are not.
We should look at a consensus. Do we have a consensus?
I think what you're proposing though allows us to, once you get into these, batches, we can actually then take a look and see where things are. It's not that we're saying restorative isn't going to be important, but it's helpful to divide these up.
Oh, wait, are we saying that green would be, sorry, it's interrupting.
Yeah.
Green would be restorative, right? The restorative ones would go in green.
Right, to the extent that that's sort of that's the evaluative criteria that's been put forward. There hasn't been another one. Mine wasn't to evaluate the merit. It was more to eliminate those that we would say should not be considered at all.
And that yellow book would be an opportunity to filter to make sure nothing slips through.
Right, and then, then as staff gets more names, it can go into one of the three. If it's someone who's alive, it goes in the red category. If it's restorative, it's clearly in the green category. And for those that don't appear to meet that, we call that like the yellow light category, if you will, or the, that you can then look at and say, we appreciate your work, staff, but perhaps that name ought to belong in somewhere else.
I wonder if the commissioners would also consider a suggestion that we combine some names. The Souza family was incredibly important to Tempe, and there are multiple Souza family members that perhaps we could consider Souza and not just a certain first name, which is Souza Park or Souza Street. The same thing with Sotelo, because it seems like there are a number of people that are different first names, but perhaps we could combine some names that are family names. Same when we had Redmond Park, we wouldn't necessarily have to call it by, we're just looking to call it Juan Souza Park, but just Souza Park, and it would kind of collapse some names into that. If they're indeed the same family members you're talking about, I mean,
So I like that thought, but wouldn't that leave the opportunity for one of the family members who are still be alive, or are we going to ensure that if it's combined names that all each of them are deceased?
The accomplishments of that family, so.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's not specifically named for a person living, but it's more to recognize the historical significance of that family's accomplishments in the community. So I think you kind of sidestep it, kind of, like you have a good point. Yeah.
descriptors.
Does my suggestion to sort, go ahead, Mel.
I was gonna say, no, I like that suggestion. However, I don't think that eliminates 20 years from now, somebody looking up Souza name and saying, oh my God, look what he did, 30 years ago. And are we now back in the same, situation?
There was Redmond, we determined there were some Redmonds that were, we knew the Redmond was named
Yeah,
after a specific Redmond though.
No, but for your suggestion, on that basis, we could keep it Redden because there was, some good Reddens and some bad Reddens. Are there good Sousas and bad Sousas that, how long is it gonna take us to do the research to validate all the names and ensure that the recommendation we're making is solid and sound? That's all.
Isn't that the same issue we ran into with Hudson Manor and the Hudson individual, because we didn't know which Hudson it was named after.
With Redden, yeah, Redden is a more pertinent example, I think, because there were two members of the Redden family who were in the KKK, but several members of the Redden family that it was actually named after. So there were several members listed in the minutes for the Parks Board, including the two KK members. And that's kind of the argument that their family members have been making is, yeah.
So somehow strike those names because there's no record against the other ones.
I'm sure the family, from the power that family had, from that family name, I'm sure that family, those other family members benefited. So, I mean, and as far as like the names that we give, saying that 20 years from now, those people may have something bad. We would know the names of these people. They're not going to be members of the KKK. I mean, it's not like you're going to have that. And the second thing I would recommend is that we reach out to the government office at Sackatoon and actually ask them for a couple recommendations. Just get it straight from the tribal leaders. And that way we make sure that we don't offend anyone and we honor people in the community that people like.
Thanks, Kim. In fact, that's kind of the subject of 4B, the expanded community outreach strategy. So I know we want to get to that, but there's still a few more comments. I think that someone, Lauren, did you or someone else? Anyone else, Julie?
So after, let's say, we figure out the names, and then will it go to historians here to research and make sure that they're all good? And how long would that take?
Yeah. We did talk about that.
If there are recommended names of individuals or even families, to Mel's point, that are recommended to council, would your staff do some research vetting to make sure that there isn't anything in the background that we're aware of that would be disqualifying?
Well, yes, to the extent that we can, but is the evidence for the situation we're in now, secret society or something that a person did that remained secret for a long time and came out later? There's only so much that we can know about a person, but I think that to the extent that we're able to do all of the research, we would want it to be like the final, not the whole list, but those that were in serious consideration, we would do some due diligence and not just us, we can run background checks. We can have, if it's somebody that's sort of recent, but if it's somebody in the deeper past, it's probably something that we would have to try and dig up as best we can.
Understood. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so before we move on, I don't want to belabor 4-H too much, but another thought I had is that in between this meeting and the next meeting, while staff is sorting, if commissioners want to identify submissions that you favor or would want to, be the ones that you would, if we had that and was submitted to staff prior to the next meeting, it might help create some separation even amongst the restorative names. If a lot of submissions that have been given rise to the top and we have 3 or 4 that receive strong support once we look at them at the next meeting, that also might help short circuit and provide some assistance in our thought process for recommendation.
So is that something you would like us to do?
Well, I'm just suggesting if there's a desire to think that that's a good idea to do that.
Yeah, so you want us to do the red, green, and yellow columns?
Staff will do that. Kim. What I was suggesting, Kim, was that each commissioner might, let's say, if there's 5 or 10 submissions, names that either are yours or ones that have been submitted, if you provide those to us in advance of the next meeting, we can then provide that to all the commissioners in advance of the next meeting, and we can have that as a basis for discussion. If there's a name that keeps repeating and there's if there's majority support or better for a name, that might help, kind of narrow the field and help kind of lessen the burden if we knew that those already existed. It's just a thought.
I think that's a great idea.
Send it to me.
Okay.
I think everyone has my email, so you can send them to me.
Okay. Let's say no more than 10. If possible. I mean, if you want to go further, obviously, the goal is 10, but, use your best discretion.
And if we don't have any options here, like, any native suggestions, because I don't think these are like honoring native tribes.
Yeah.
What do we write for that?
Well, we're going to get to that in 4B. But before we do, one more thing. I know Lisa Groom is here observing. Unfortunately, she missed the call of the audience, but I want to give everyone who wants to speak an opportunity to speak. So Lisa's indicated that she would like to speak, and go ahead, Lisa. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. I think what I wanted to say is almost echoing the sentiments, but without doing so directly. Because historically we were outlawed in Tempe. Up until the 60s, Tempe was a sundown town. So when you say that the people we should name these streets and parks after should be people that have had an impact in Tempe, I'm going to say it again. We didn't have that opportunity. Tempe has not been equitable for Black people. And we're just not getting to a point where we can start talking about that. And this committee coming together to rename these streets is part of what we're trying to do here. The restorative piece to me is understanding the fact that the Klan existed and was ever only in existence because of Black people. Even though they hated everybody, we were the reason why. And we were the only ones that brought them together as a group before they decided that they hated everybody else. And so it's kind of hard to hear people dismiss the seriousness of this for Black people because it doesn't have any real impact on you and your history. But for us sitting here listening to this, you walk away feeling something different than you do. So I'm just saying that if you could keep in mind the deleterious history of the city of Tempe, and it's at the hands of these people, that for us, it's always going to be something additional. And we're not going to have as many Black people that we can throw in this pot in the city where Black people weren't allowed to live, work without being arrested after a certain time of day. So I'm just simply saying that I told Keely when she told me that this is where it was going to get hard for me, and this is what was going to get hard for some of us, and that's why I understand the emotion of Commissioner D'Artes, because it's so easy to just say they should have to have had some kind of significance. Who would that be? In a town where we were not allowed to be. So we only have a couple people, and most of our historians, our heroes would never have lived in a sundown town to have made a difference. So I just wanted to say that if you're talking about being restorative, it's to also give consideration to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on now to item 4B. Which is expanded community outreach strategy.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we went back after the last meeting and thought about what you all had said. And a group of us, including our neighborhood services director and our communications director and Lisa Groom, who is with our Black Employee Alliance, talked about how we try to do a more comprehensive public outreach strategy. So we've tried to capture some ideas here. If you feel like we're not, there's more that we need to do, we need to hear from you. But if you think we're on the right track, we need to hear that too. So I think the first thing we really tried to narrow down on is what is the purpose of the outreach? And it sounded to me from you all that you want some community outreach of certain groups that maybe aren't as familiar with this issue. And specifically to get input on new name ideas. So not to necessarily debate the issue of whether or not we're going to do new names, but really to seek out new name ideas. And then who in the community we want to reach. And again, based on the conversation we had, it was individuals and groups we feel were most impacted by societal, racial, or ethnic inequities. So getting back to the restorative, that to me sounded like the group we wanted to try to reach out, because we weren't going to just assume that they would come to us necessarily, because that's just not how government works. So that, I think, hopefully reflects what you want your outreach strategy to be. Okay, next one. So specifically, we already extended the online forum. We say right now it says it's open until the 31st of October, but we would actually recommend that you leave it open and longer than that. So through whatever we end up having the timeline of of activities be, probably that online forum is still the best place for people to go, you know, whenever they have time to give us ideas. So, so we would say, you know, we're happy to, we can easily keep it open and keep running a new list and adding those to this new green, red, yellow chart. So, okay, take some, if you want to take questions along the way or.
Go ahead.
I just want to, because since we have decided to filter a bit, you know, can we put in a requirement that has to be someone no longer living, and that it also, you know, preference is going to be given to restorative names that are restorative? Because why, you know, invite people and basically say, no thanks, we don't want that one.
Yeah.
You know, Wisteria Lane, decided, and why not be filtering, since we've made that decision already?
I think if that's the committee's will, we can add that verbiage. I think people will continue to write into it what they want to write. But we could certainly add that if that's your direction.
Well, that's just my suggestion, I guess. That's a good idea.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll apply that to the directions in the form. Thank you.
Okay. And then we're going to do, again, sort of depending upon the timeline of these activities, we'll be doing a lot of extra public relations and media promotion of both the project and the request for the naming ideas. And we tried to think of some ways we could be creative about that, maybe go to some outlets that we hadn't thought of typically that we do. We have a lot of, probably most of you get the Tempe, you know, all the Tempe social media network or newsletters and things, but we were trying to brainstorm some other ways we could do that as well. And then what came up last meeting, which we already are collecting names from lots of places, but we wanted to make it clear to all of you or make sure you all are okay with us taking names from any avenue we get it in. So it's a little bit hard to, you know, organize, but we're getting them from all over the place, and we would want to take them from you. We would want to take them from people when we're out in the field at these activities. And I think even Raylyn suggested, or it came up during her comment, even designating some people to take names for us and then working with them, like maybe the people give the names to the tribal representatives, and then we kind of create a network of people who can talk to, give those names to us. So that was what we wanted to write into this plan. Slide. Sorry. And then this is where I think this is our hardest part of this, and we really need your help. We are trying to build a non-traditional outreach list. I think all of us who work in city government know there's a group of people out there that are already paying attention to everything we do. We're trying to figure out how to get beyond that list to not necessarily people that are always paying attention. We have a few city lists already that folks have, Shauna Warner has the Equity in Action list. We have a community group that worked with us on that project that we're already going to reach out to. The Cops and Clergy list, which Lisa Groom oversees as part of the police department, works with a lot of clergy that are in the Black churches and churches that serve communities of color. But we need to get more of that. So we really need recommendations from you all of who these groups are. I mean, I think we've talked a lot here about the La Victoria neighborhood, but where are the other neighborhoods that we need to figure out somebody in those neighborhoods? Lauren, and I do have a list from Lauren too, from early on.
The Tempe Interfaith Fellowship.
I don't know if that one's on there, but.
And also Las Semillas focuses a lot of their work on La Victoria.
What was the name of the second group?
Semillas, Semillas.
Okay, okay, good. Yeah, veterans, okay. Again, like we have a veterans coordinator, so I can work with him, but, and we do have a veterans, I mean, you're on the Veterans Commission, but if there's any kind of non-conventional groups that maybe don't immediately come to mind, like, those are the kinds that we're looking for too. And then once we have this list built, which will probably be an ongoing project, we really want to, we'll let them know, obviously, about all of the activities we're doing and how they can submit their names. Going to the next. We really felt like it was important to go to where people were. We had a long discussion about should we have town halls or should we try to go to where people are to solicit, to educate and to solicit name ideas. I think we kind of tried to land in the middle, and we do suggest one town hall meeting at least, but just knowing that, again, people who are already involved we've gotten tons of submissions on the survey, so they're not necessarily people who are going to come to a town hall meeting unless the right person asks them about it. So we feel like it's really important to go out to where people are and do some tabling at events, at churches, community meetings. We're already talking with Raylyn about setting up a presentation at the Four Southern Tribes meeting to both, again, educate them on what we're doing, as well as solicit their name ideas and try to come up with a way to do some vetting, like people have suggested here, of ideas for names to make sure we're not doing something that is offensive.
Just as a thought, because game night is coming up, and at least in those parks, you know, there's going to be a lot of events around the city and parks.
Okay, yeah, we could probably do a flyer or something.
Yeah.
Good idea. All right. Work on that tomorrow.
I'm not sure if a town hall is a good idea. I feel like it's re-traumatizing the community. We had that meeting last year. Council made a decision. We're now working on the renaming, and to sort of go back, it's gonna sort of relitigate and re-traumatize. I don't think it's, I think going where people are is a great idea.
Well, we had someone who suggested a town hall at the last meeting, so we were trying to find kind of a happy medium. So we will take direction. Honestly, whatever you think we should do. I'm not married to the town hall idea personally. I'm just trying to kind of reflect back to what we were hearing. Andrew, you would go.
I was just thinking about the fact, we just buried, Mr. Livingston. He died just a month ago, and he was actually the first African-American that was able to buy a home in Tempe. So that's how tender this history is. I mean, it does go back very far. He literally just passed away, and I believe he was 84. And when he bought his home in Tempe, they were told they could not have a child for 5 years. That was the only way they'd sell him the house. So we're not talking like you have a lot of history here. You really don't.
But it's on our list.
Thank you, Kim. Mel first and then Justin.
I guess my question is there a perceived end date deadline for this committee completing its recommendations to city council? And I think we need to have an understanding of what that date is. If we're going to start talking about public outreach, and how long is that going to take? How long is that going to go on? And does this all mesh together date wise?
Well, Mr. Chairman, Mel, yes, we originally had sort of a timeline, but I definitely got the message at the last meeting that the outreach was more important than the timeline. At least that's what I walked away from that meeting with. So we went back and thought about, well, what do we need to do to get that kind of outreach? And you will see in like the last slide when I'm asking for committee direction, what do you want to do about a timeline? Like, do you want to create sort of an end date that we can work around, so that we can, one, make a timeline, which was another request of a committee meeting or committee member for our website. But I think that you're right, that it's important to have a timeline, but I'm taking it kind of from the approach of everything that needs to get done and then sort of working backwards from that.
I just wanted to also kind of say what's already been said, and echo what said about town hall meeting. I mean, we already had direction from council to get this done now. And also what you said yourself, Keelan, about like, it's the same people that come up to the town hall meetings, the same people who know. I think there needs to be more effort into the people that aren't in the know or aren't in the network of knowing what's going on in the city. And I think those are the voices that are important to hear. A town hall meeting is going to be the same people who come to every single council meeting or every single other meeting. I just think it's to an extent redundant and not necessary when we're trying to like get in names. But I love the idea of going to more places where people are that might be not in the know of normal city activities to be able to solicit those names.
Thank you.
Well, an additional strategy we did want to also employ would be to send postcards to the addresses of the people who are on the streets that are impacted, both to give them a little bit of an alert that this is coming and that we are going to provide something down the line to compensate them for costs that they might have, but also again to solicit names. So that would actually be going into all of those addresses, particularly over on East Laird, which is the Victoria neighborhood.
Question, do we know if there are any businesses that, name themselves after the street or the name of the park?
There, Mr. Chairman, there might be, I don't know. There are businesses named Hudson. But that's really outside of what we can control. I mean, we really only are naming the streets, the assets that the city owns, the parks and streets. I don't know what's gonna come of that. There's actually no business addresses that we can find either on any of those streets. So I think we're all just talking about residences that would be impacted by the address change. But I do know there's businesses named Hudson that are close to the Hudson Manor community.
It's called The Hudson.
Yeah.
So there's a restaurant bar that's right there called The Hudson.
Just as a suggestion, I think it's a great idea to send it to addresses, but you might also include neighborhoods where there's the park. Because, you know, if you're talking about Hudson, right? If you're gonna change Hudson Park to something else, let's get those neighbors involved in that as well. It would just be my thought. I know it's a lot of postcards, but it's a community that's there that uses that park, so in addition to the streets.
Is that, everybody agree with that? Okay.
I'm just saying as a devil's advocate, is there in some ways you want to get this information to folks around the park and the streets early to let them know what's going on, but in other ways, would it be better to go through filtering? So, or even it's kind of filtering, like here's the 20 names, which ones, and you don't want it to be like a popularity contest, but what if we send this out and people come up all these names and then none of them are used, and people are going to be upset? Does it make sense to wait until it's more of a filtering and say, here's some of the names we've come up with, can you weigh in on this particular?
I guess it depends on what the mailer would say.
Yeah.
I think what they were saying is that we're still accepting names. That if and when there's a name change, that we would provide, you know, financial support if you can demonstrate that you had a financial hardship as a result of the name change. For the streets, yes. For the parks, it's probably less likely.
Right, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. I think you could have a different strategy for your postcards for the parks versus the streets, because the parks is more of just a public input conversation versus education on what resources might be available to them.
Right.
And just, I don't really talk about it here, but just to refresh your memory from the last meeting, our initial idea was to narrow down the list and then do more public outreach on just those names. So the idea being like maybe you have 10 names that you're considering for the 5 to 6, depending upon if you separate West and East Laird. And then try and do another round of public hearing of some sort, maybe a forum. So to kind of Lauren's point, I mean, you could wait till that second round or, I don't know how people feel about that, but.
I'm okay either way. I just think that we need to include the parks in some way.
Yeah,
I'm not tied to when, I'm just tied to making sure they have a voice.
Well, and just to that point, if you want to see which neighborhoods they are, we're going to talk about it at the end, but there's a map that I gave everybody that shows you where the parks are. So we've got 2 parks that are sort of in the south part of Tempe, Harrelson and Redden. And then the Hudson's up in North Tempe, well, University area of Tempe, Middle Tempe.
In social media, we heard tonight from one of that was the public, the sense that it's going to cost millions of dollars. We know from the Phoenix sample case study that the approximate cost, I think it's like the approximate cost is something like, I'm gonna say $100, $118, something like that.
I don't have their exact cost, but it's 170 names, roughly 170 addresses that's impacted. And then we'd have to do name changes for the park signs. So it's, even if you were to give up to a couple $100 per person to deal with, you know, the name, your passport and your driver's license. I mean, it's not an excessive amount of money. I haven't actually roughed out the total budget for it yet, just because we're kind of just haven't gotten there yet. But I mean, I could try to do that before the next meeting if you like.
And if we can maybe have a discussion about that, because I think it's fair to, well, I know with utilities, you can just give them all the names and they can change that. They even have to reach out to each individual utility. You can do that in a bulk way, and that's what the city of Phoenix did. But I think there should be sort of compensation for the hassle for people. You know, it's having to do it, you know, pay $20, whatever it is. I think there should be some consideration for, I mean, in my mind, it's good trouble, but some consideration for that. So not just the exact amount, it's your driver's license or passport, it costs this much. But I think there should be consideration for the inconvenience. But I don't know if that's a good, maybe talk about it.
All right.
I think it's something to keep in mind. We don't have to decide it today. And I know that the sorting out of how much and what we would compensate for is a recommendation we would make back to council ultimately, I think, for this. and having some cost estimates could include a high, low, higher, if we were to go down the kind of the path that you're describing, but I appreciate this. I don't think we need to decide that at this moment.
If you, just to, on that point, if you look at that, the link that I sent everybody from the city of Phoenix's process, so there's, you actually have to request the money. So it's not like, they were a little more like the onus is on the people to ask for the money than like it really, the city going, hey, here's the money, like, don't you want it? But just so people, I mean, so there's different ways to work on it.
Well, could I just suggest that I don't like that approach because there's people that are too busy or not gonna notice or don't even know or may not speak the language or undocumented. I mean, we have to be mindful that we have to treat people with equity. And again, it's a part of going where they are and then helping them through the process.
Okay, so do we feel like are we covering all the places, like the equity in action? I'm not sure what group, what that represents. Do we need to go to senior centers?
Yeah,
Library,
I don't necessarily feel like we're covering all the places. That's what I need some input from you guys on, which I guess is the next, actually, maybe it is the next slide. Yeah, committee involvement. So we do need your involvement and assistance. So I feel like we're asking you all to think about where are the places that you think we should be, or the groups we should talk to, or the individuals we should be talking to, and just send those again to me via email. And as we start to get more events, like if we're doing a table somewhere, I really like the game night idea. We'll get some flyers made and try to get those distributed. Game night is a neighborhood thing for those of you that aren't familiar with it, where I think there's like 40 neighborhood groups in the city that are having events all on Saturday this weekend. So we'd like you to come out there and be part of that. So it's not just staff. I mean, I think the idea is that you all are on this committee and you represent your community and you have more sway with that community than staff does, frankly. So we'd like for you to be involved and help us know how you want us to be involved. But we're certainly internally doing all we can to try to think about how to create that non-traditional list. And then to your timeline issue, when would you, I mean, I don't know if we're going to do the town hall still, sounds like it's sort of up in the air, but how long do you want to allow for this? I mean, do people feel like they want to set an end date at this point or start to thinking about that so we can kind of create a timeline and work backwards with these ideas on them? And then how does that impact your future meeting schedule? You do have a meeting scheduled for the 1st. I think probably for the 1st, we could get everything we've gotten so far into your red, yellow, green list. We could probably get some level of a budget probably for how much it would cost to do some reimbursement for folks along that street. We could probably flesh out a little bit more of this plan with some stuff that we've talked about today. But I didn't know if you wanted to schedule, skip a meeting and sort of let some outreach happen before December 7th, or if you want to keep meeting. So we need some direction from you guys on how you want to proceed.
Thanks, Keely. Thoughts about all of these?
Are names still coming in like a rapid pace or they slow down?
No, it's open until the 31st. I left it open. I mean, I got between the 17th, so that document that I passed around, I ran the first one on the 13th and the second one that's on here 4 days later, and I had, 4 more pages of stuff. But a lot of them were the Redden families. I think there was sort of an orchestrated effort by a couple of people to put stuff in. So, I mean, they're coming in still, and there's a lot on here. We've gotten a lot of names.
And is our communication, is it available in Spanish as well?
Not yet. I was just thinking if we do a game flyer, I was gonna ask for it to be in Spanish too. But we can certainly make, we definitely will make, if we're gonna have collateral materials to use at tabling and that sort of thing, I would make it in
I
Spanish.
think some of our community and senior centers.
So one thing, I don't know in terms of the meetings and all, but I guess if we did meet November 1st, it would be like a first cut to see how we feel about the red, yellow, green, kind of looking and seeing if we all send to you ideas, see if we're starting to get some consensus of narrowing down. Maybe we'll have 10 or 20 that we all are like, yeah, those are a good start. So I could see that meeting being something like that, where we're having those kinds of discussions of what do we really feel we don't want to consider? What do we, even if we narrow it down to 30, that's 30. It's better than where
That's
we
true.
are now, right? So maybe that could be our November 1st meeting, and then you could also indicate how the outreach is going and where we are to know whether or not we should meet in December or put that off if we need more time for outreach. It's just a thought.
What if you send out a Google, that's what the poll, Google questions, and you list the greens and the greens and the yellows, and then just ask us, like, just select 20. And then it would filter, and you wouldn't have to do a lot of manual labor, but it would just sort of filter for you. People could pick from green and from yellows, get through the poll, but it would be limited, so if you did 21 and tried to cheat, it wouldn't allow you to do the 21st, or, whatever number we would decide, but it would see if we might find there's some commonality right away.
I guess the only kind of just not the issue, I think that's a fine way to move forward with it. I guess the only thing is like to ramp up some of this outreach that's non-traditional. It's going to take a while to get off the ground. And then by the time, I mean, and that's okay if you want to make your decisions or get it down, whittled down. And then that's the group that we're talking to these folks about versus like just an open-ended ask for their input. I guess that's my concern, is that if we're kind of doing this more unconventional outreach, how open are you to what they're going to suggest? Or do you want them to just react to your list of 30 that you guys come up with?
Boy, maybe it's a next step thing. So we don't do this.
Justin,
it's a good point.
I was going to say the outreach thing, just thinking about like my career, what I do for my career, and how long it takes to like build things and set up outreach and things like that. Like we're looking at 2 weeks for the November 1st meeting, how much outreach and non-traditional outreach is actually going to be able to accomplish in some of these mechanisms that we're talking about being built today, like a Google spreadsheet that you're allowed to vote on and this, that. Like I almost think that we have a good like direction of how we would cut this down, and it'd be best to like skip the November 1st and come back on the December 7th and allow us to submit our top 20 that we've seen so far, and allow us the outreach to play out so it's true outreach and not just in name trying to rush and get it done, check a box outreach. I feel like we've done good work today, and I'm not saying we should just like punt the November 1st meeting, but just hearing about like what we want to see and put in place with outreach and like mechanisms to be built, just 2 weeks just seems, again, like I wouldn't even be designing it. It kind of gives me like kind of chills, saying like, oh, I know what happens to me at work when I have to deal with this type of stuff. So I'm sure like staff right now over there is doing like 2 weeks. You guys got all this. So I'd rather have it done right and have a robust outreach thing. And like if it drags on an extra month and we miss a meeting, like I'd rather have it done right. Like my shop. That's just personal.
So the suggestion has been offered to skip the November 1st meeting to allow for the outreach that's been posed to take place, at least in part. Is there anyone opposed to that notion to skip the November 1st meeting and have our next meeting be December 7th?
Opposed to it. However,
Which one, November 1st or December 7th?
November 1st.
Oh, okay.
Pencil to cave free.
I'm not opposed to changing because I agree with you. You absolutely are right. My concern though is that if we push it, and I don't have a problem with this if we do, but then the timeline is also going to be pushed beyond, because then we're probably going to have 1 or 2 more meetings after that December 7th.
Yeah.
So let's just be mindful of that part.
I think you're right. I was sensing from this group that we were probably going to have to have at least 1 more meeting anyway, maybe 2. So if we had 2 more, we'd end up with a total of 5 as opposed to 4. They would just be later. My guess is after December 7th, the rest of 2022 is probably difficult just because of people's holidays and schedules. We're probably looking at maybe a meeting in January and possibly 1 in February if needed. And then with a recommendation to go to council maybe in March, which throws us off by maybe a month, maybe a month and a half.
My only concern about the delay is just getting money in the budget to deal with the reimbursement of folks. But I think since you're the city manager, you can help make that sure happen.
We don't, I mean.
Yeah, I think as long as we give sort of we give our budget staff a number that we think is as large as it needs to be. If it ends up being smaller, we're okay. The only issue with budget is that at some point, when council votes on a tentative budget, that's as big as the budget can get. And I don't think that quote of millions is right. I don't think that's anywhere near right. I think we're really talking thousands. So my hope is that if we said, just out of nowhere, we said $50,000, let's say.
Yeah.
And that was an over exaggeration. We could have a placeholder in the budget. The council's tentative adoption isn't until probably the end of May or the beginning of June anyway. So we're talking about a pretty significant period of time where we could work with budget staff and come up with a number that is at least adequate and maybe even larger than we need, but it won't be smaller than we need.
So if we skip the next meeting, though, there would be interaction where maybe you would send us a list that was sorted green, yellow, red. And we
Yes.
could give our top 20, 25, whatever you think.
Yeah, my thought would be between now and the next meeting is we'll sort that list, give it to you, and then have you write back to us, from that list or otherwise your 20, I guess if we're doing 20. It was 10 before, so I'm not sure. Now it's
Well, inflation the way it is.
So you give us your 20, and between now and then, I would want to be working with you individually to get any names or groups or events that you think we should focus on, and then probably regurgitating to you what we were doing. So if you wanted to come with us to those, like you would know those things were happening between now and December 7th. And then we'd probably try and get some meeting dates for January and February. So you'd be hearing from us about that as well.
Just to modify, I think that if we as a committee work toward the November 1st as though there was gonna be a meeting, but just did our online homework and got the stuff
We can have
to
it.
Keely, like in 2 weeks isn't bad for us to make up our minds about which names we're gonna back. So but we can at least get things going and keep things going so that you have something to work with between now and the 7th of December.
In that case, could you do the sorting hat for the gate meetings we have now?
Yes.
Early enough? So
Yeah, we'll do those. We can probably even do
But
those
it'll be
this
a
week.
rolling list because we're going to continue
Yeah.
our submissions.
That way we don't waste your time looking at people who, presently
Yeah.
live and.
Did we get consensus on whether or not we would keep the form open past October 31st?
I didn't really hear. I mean, I still feel like if you want there to be community input, I think it makes sense to leave it open because that's the easiest way for us to put on a flyer, like,
Yeah.
here's how you, So,
Okay, good.
okay,
So we'll keep that open at least until our next meeting, right? Which should be December 7th.
okay, yeah.
Well, we'll see.
Maybe a week prior to give you some opportunity to clean it up and.
Yeah,
get us-
maybe the end of November.
November 30?
Okay.
Okay.
I'm on the commission for the Human Relations Commission. We just got our, notice. I forget the name of the position, the Director of Equity.
Alicia, she's here.
The Chief Diversity Officer.
Yes, Chief Diversity.
Dr. Melissa McMillan is here. Today's her second day. She just arrived yesterday.
She's actually who I'm thinking about because being part of that commission, we knew every step of all the interview process. What I do know is that, remind me your name?
Felisa McMillan.
Felisa?
Yeah.
Okay, Ms. Felisa, what I understand, what I was told is that she applied on the second, applications. And they had a bundle of individuals and the second individual dropped out. So that's why they got Felisa in and ended up hiring her. So my concern is that if we right now use this list and name R20, and if we have a running list, we might not find our Felisa that we need to have our name. So that's kind of my concern right now is that if we give you guys this list, I don't know how we can incorporate the running list to be part of that.
I've just been sitting here thinking about how I would try to present this to you. My thought would be to do your lists and have that, and then just as new names were coming up, sort of have a supplemental document that we kept looking at in your public meetings that, oh, and we also got all of these names since you did your 20 And then you could just look at those new names, maybe it's only 10, 15, and decide, are any of these ones that to my top 20? Yes, if so, will enough of you care about that, we'll stick it into the good group. If not, then, you know, they've been considered, but they wouldn't change. So I don't think you would, I will figure out a way to give you guys a chance to review any kind of submissions we're getting throughout the process that come after you, sort of giving us your
I
feedback.
think within each of those three sorting categories, we should probably have some, you know, those received prior to this meeting and everything we received afterwards. So you would know when new submissions came in that they would be, you know, grouped within those buckets, if you will, to know that they're new. To your point, so you can look at it and say, we reserve the right to have, you know, I mean, I was only saying 10 because I know that at some point, you know, if we say,
People want to go 10?
it doesn't matter. I mean, my point, what I was saying is, it's a starting point, but it's not a hard and fast rule, because to your point, William, what if you saw something and said, I already did my 10, but there's a great name here that wasn't announced before. I'd like to throw my, you know, my cast a vote for that one, so to speak. You should have that opportunity to do that. I don't want to place restrictions to say that if you go beyond 10, we're just not going to get there. No, this is not what this is about. I think we're trying to be fairly lenient to allow both the public and the commissioners here to have the opportunity to really evaluate all submissions, especially since we're extending the time.
And the outreach.
Just may add really quick, if this is just, you know, kind of getting the ball rolling, without, you know, our selections are not, you know, we're not bonded by it, then, you know, I guess we can easily eliminate the ones that we know we don't like. And if it's just a running list of each of us, it's not, you know, shouldn't be too much of a task to kind of filter through the next batch.
Right.
The other option or suggestion is, let's pick 10 from this first list and then pick 10 from the last batch, but I just feel like that may be a bit duplicative, but because I think with the effectively the outreach is going to, you know, kind of get a bump in submissions that, you know, can kind of give a fair consideration for.
Sure. And again, my reason for suggesting all that was to see if there were names that were repeating themselves, that we would know that some things rose to the top, and we should at least continue to consider those that would assist thinking over time. It was never meant to say, and once they're there, that don't consider anything else. Of course, as we keep the online submission rolling, names may come in. I thought of somebody just right now, as I'm sitting here, that I had not thought of before, that I think would be an excellent suggestion. But I'll keep you in suspense, and we'll see. We'll see if the rest of you agree. But yes, yes, exactly. You can run this and go on. Right.
Oh, it's just that we're gonna have that filter. We're saying what our emphasis is on restorative names and.
Right, yeah.
So if any of you could give me any names that weren't mentioned today, that aren't on this existing list that I've sent you today, that you want to be considered. So I'm not talking about your 10. I'm just saying like people whose names you've thought of or have been requested, you know, recommended to you, and you don't see them in the documents that particularly, what I did was I summarized these big documents on this presentation. So everything that was on this document, a lot of these have duplicates, triplicates, I talked about once on this document. So look at your PowerPoint, and if there's somebody you want added to the first round, let us know, I would say by the end of the week. And then we will send you guys all the first sort of red, yellows, greens. And then you guys can get back to us your top 20 from those by the end of that week, by November 1st. And then we'll do a new list for you that is just everybody's 20, right? So that then it's probably going to be more like a list of 50, or because there's probably going to be overlap between a lot of you.
We should do less than 20 if we're gonna.
Yeah. And then I think, so then you'll have that to work from, right? And that'll still have some greens and yellows, because some of you will have recommended yellows that, you know, maybe you'll discard later, but who knows, you know, what you're gonna do with them. And then we'll always have a new list, which are the new submissions we're getting, that then you can look at and say, oh, you know what, there's 2 people on here. I think we should push on to the master list. All right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would recommend that maybe we do 10, because there's gonna be more that come up, and then we'll have native communities will suggest them, so that's gonna probably take some time. What's the point down to 50? It's still gonna be overwhelming. Might as well just, we do 10, it'll probably end up being with.
Okay. Is that sufficient direction for staff?
Yeah, so 10 names is what everyone's giving us.
Correct.
We'll have I'll go through that process I just talked to you about. So by November 1st, you're getting back to us, your 10. We're going to cancel the November 1st meeting. We'll have communications with you about outreach opportunities, what's going on between now and December 7th. We'll make a timeline that shows the committee meeting through like February. And the outreach happening through at least, I guess, through the middle of December. It sounds like it's probably what we're going to need to be doing, because I just think there's going to be things that come up after November even that we might, I don't know if we're going to be able to get the 4 Southern tribes scheduled between now and the end of November because of Thanksgiving. And so we'll try to write that into a timeline for you to react to next time. Okay.
What are the names of the 4 Southern tribes?
What are the names? Salt River, Gila River, Tohono O'odham, and
Ak-Chin.
Thank you. Thank you, Ak-Chin.
Thank you.
I have a comment. This is Relyn.
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to remind the commission that the 4 Southern tribes have not been presented with this information regarding the renaming, and there will not, and in the names here that they provided from October 13th to October 17th, you know, there are a few names that I see in there. I do not know if they were submitted by a representative of the Native American community. I can only assume that they were provided by the Native American community, but I cannot be certain. And just so the commission is aware that the process for getting any potential bids is gonna take some time. Like we can certainly do our best to get those names, but it will be taking time.
Yeah. And just to your point, I don't know, I think these were just offered by individuals. We'd have to look up who the specific people were, but nobody represented themselves as representing a tribe who that gave these names that are on those lists now.
Okay. Keely, do you have enough direction at this point? Do we know?
I think so.
So we're going to, let me see if I can summarize. We're going to cancel the November 1st meeting. Our next meeting together will be December 7th. In the meantime, staff will be sorting, as we've discussed, using the criteria that's been discussed to create 3 groupings, those that we've agreed we won't consider, those that would meet the criteria as being a restorative name, and those that would not. Green, yellow, if you will, kind of using the stoplight analogy. And that in that same time, the names that are currently available to the commission, commissioners are free to select up to 10 names for consideration or for the preferred consideration. And that will be provided, those requests will be provided either at or before our next meeting on December 7th. And that in the meantime, staff will move to do the outreach that's been laid out today, with the exception, unless there's an objection, that we will not be conducting a town hall. Is that reflective of the direction? Okay, good. Anything else on this matter before we conclude item 4B?
Can I just clarify?
Yes, Joe.
Do we send our 10 names before you do the filter?
No.
No.
If you have any names that aren't already on
Okay,
the
good.
PowerPoint that you want considered in the first
Right.
version of the filter,
I got that.
send those to me by the end of this week. Okay, like Andrew's person he's thinking of. He should send that to me by the end of this week, and then the first filter version document will include any of those names too. And like who people brought up today, I'll add those to the list. Okay,
Very good.
all right, thank you so much.
Okay, our next, we'll close item 4. We'll go to item 5, future agenda items. Do any members of the committee Want to talk about anything else that we haven't talked about yet at the next meeting? Is there an agenda item you want added?
We talked about talking about compensating people and having a sort of brainstorming everything that has to be considered. Like business cards and.
Yeah,
all of
we will add compensation or suggestions for compensation. That way we can research what other cities have done and give you an idea of what the sort of the initial starting place is, and we can entertain additional suggestions. Thank you. Okay, we'll add that. Anyone else? Anyone online? Okay, hearing none. Next item is any announcements from any member of the committee. Okay, I don't have any announcements at this time. We will adjourn. Our next meeting of the committee will be December 7th, 2022 at 4 o'clock.
We actually have to have that meeting at the Tempe History Museum because this room is not available. So the next one will be at the Tempe History
Okay.
Museum. We'll send out.
Meeting at the Tempe History Museum, I assume in the community room?
Yeah.
At the Tempe History Museum. So Southern and rural. We will see as many of you who can be here in person would be great. There will also be the virtual option for that meeting as well. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate, it was a really good discussion today. I'm, again, very appreciative of the time that everyone's made to be a part of this important process. And we will see you on December 7th. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.